This is so strange to be in person. It's great to see faces. I'm so used to being on Zoom. So, when I consider Lucille Tenazas, it's hard not to ponder a potential connection between her last name and tenacity. She embodies this word. It seems to me that it defines her spirit, her work, and her contributions throughout her long career. A career as a thinker, maker, and mentor. It is no small thing to have a practice of both endurance and relevance. It's tenacity, or in this case, tenazas. As our friend and designer and historian and educator, Lorraine Wild emphasizes, graphic design is part of a continuum. We call it history. Ideas and concepts emerge and shift, and so do the contexts. Contexts that include changes in technology, society, and culture. Our work doesn't emerge in a vacuum. It flows in a river of time. In this salon today, with Lucille, taking place at the Letterform Archive, we are in the context of this amazing repository of the deep and wide waters of design history, that continuum from which those of us as designers have all emerged. We are fortunate to have Lucille here to reflect on that continuum in her own work. To give you a bit of background on Lucille as a case study of tenacity, she was born in the Philippines, where her initial education and career in design began. There was a brief stint at CCAC, California College of Arts and Crafts, now CCA, in San Francisco, before she found herself at Cranbrook. This after having been rejected by the institution twice. From Cranbrook, she went on to work as a designer in New York until a talk in 1984 at CCAC led to an offer to teach. She came back to San Francisco, and as her teaching evolved, she began encouraging students to produce work informed by their personal history, by observation, and of their world and their experience in it. This momentously replaced the model of education in which students replicated professional projects. Instead, under Lucille's tutelage, designers became trained as thinkers, observers, and makers. This new approach to education is part of what has become known as the underground matriarchy, of which Lucille was one of a handful of very influential women radically shifting graphic design education. She has gone on to start new momentous programs in design education at CCA and later at Parsons. Along the way, she served as president of AIGA in the mid-90s and received the National Design Award for Communication Design from the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, may it continue, in 2002, and the AIGA Medal in 2013. She is currently the Henry Wolf Professor in the School of Art, Media, and Technology at Parsons, the New School of Design. Paralleling her considerable contributions as an educator, she launched Tenazas Design in San Francisco when she was teaching here in the mid to late 1980s, a practice that continues today. It was work that became noted and in demand increasingly for her use of a complex interplay between language and image, works of incredible elegance, beauty, and poetry. Simply put, Lucille's impact has been wide-ranging and considerable. It is a contribution that has changed the ebb and flow of design in so many ways. And with that, I'd like to welcome Lucille and everyone who is joining us.
But thank you, Louise. I'm like, all these years, my trajectory has been, you just don't really compare yourself to anybody and you just do things on your own way. I remember somebody telling me, you don't look forward, you don't look back, you don't look sideways, you go forward and backwards type of thing. So it's really your path, your linear path. So I am at Parsons at in New York, and I'm the Henry Wolf professor. Prior to that, I was here, of course, at CCA for 20 years. Who's Henry Wolf? People always ask me. Henry Wolf was, of course, the iconic Austrian-born American designer and photographer, and he was very.
It's like not connected.
Okay. So anyway, as I was saying, Henry Wolf, I am the first Henry Wolf professor at Parsons, and he was connected with the new school as a trustee. And when he passed away, his family gave a chair, funded a chair in his name. And so I would say would be, I mean, as you can see here from the covers, I would call him the grandfather of American magazine design. You don't see these designs as much anymore. You see personalities on the cover. But conceptually, a lot of these, like even like slivers of faces like this, who would do this? But I think that was what he did. He really, few magazine art directors at the time wielded a lot of control, more than Henry Wolf. And he was known for his very bold, yet simple use of typography. And I'm just showing you the covers here. So I thought, as my personal history is really important for me because I came here as an adult. I was 25 years old. I wasn't dragged by my parents. I had a choice. And so when you come to a country as an adult, I think it's really different because it's a one of choice. So I thought, since the Philippines, when we were in school, we were taught English. I was bilingual. And so I thought, why not go to a country where you already speak the language? And so the US was the first place, and San Francisco, of course. All of these are really about statistics, right? Some of you may not know this, but the Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands. Okay, we were under Spain for 300 years. We were under the US for 50. But the impact of the US is more felt now. Why? Because they were benign. And this is always very interesting because the Spanish were brutal. And so we were up against them in arms. There were a lot of revolts, but the Americans were calm. But what they did was, of course, they implanted the culture and the language even more potent. It's a Catholic country. It's the only Catholic country in the Southeast Asia. But this is what's interesting. That's the reason why I'm interested in languages, is that there are over 120 dialects because one island to the next, they do not speak the same language. So if you were to go to the north, my parents come from the central island here. Manila is there in the middle. If you were to go to the north, the only way you could be understood is if you speak English. Now, isn't that unusual? Because English was the medium of instruction. It was the lingua franca. And so the only way that you can be understood is if you speak the common language. It wasn't even Tagalog, because Tagalog is only spoken in the metropolitan Manila area. So that's really, and this quote by James Fallows is really very meaningful. The very kindness of American rule is part of the Philippine pathology because it leaves most Filipinos torn between wanting to break free from American influence and wanting to move to LA. Right? And so here I am. My name is Lucille, and I was named after Lucille Ball. Why? Because she was big in the 50s. Okay, so I want to, and this is great. I'm so glad that you talked about the etymology of my name, because I talked about this. We had a family reunion 2 years ago. So Tenazas means pincers or tongs. And why is that? Okay, so it was because of this Spanish Governor General, Narciso Claveria, who was a Governor General in the Philippines, and he was interested in giving everybody surnames because it of course made sense for taxation purposes, also to just make sure that everybody could be identified, because perhaps at the time people were only known by their first names. So he had a book, a catalog. Catálogo Alfabético de Apellidos means it's a book of surnames. So this book had 61,000 last names, if you can believe it, okay? And what he did was, just imagine a phone book that has 61,000 names. He broke it up and he said, you take this back to this province and you take this back. So he just ripped off piles of these pages. And so in my father's province, there are a lot of T's. Okay. And in my mother's town, there are a lot of R's, but my mother's name is an L. Anyway, so this is what you'll find in the dictionary. If it was in the Castilian way, tenazas, because you do not pronounce the Z, is tenazas, and it means tongs or pincers. So we had a family reunion many years before, and I designed a T-shirt that had this on the front. And then on the back, this was it. So people were walking around in Las Vegas. And I said, what is that? And I said, well, it's my family. Okay, so just to show you, a few years ago, I was on a jury for a competition in Madrid. So this was the website, and it says, Lucille Tenazas here. So I thought I want to do automatic translate so I can read the rest of this. Guess what it says? Automatic translate Lucille Tongs. I like that. I have to take a picture of that. Okay, so this is the system that my father came up with. So I'm the daughter of a civil engineer father and a history teacher mother. So I would say I have both left brain and right brain. I have the systems thinking of my father and the kind of intuitive liberal arts, social sciences references that my mother instilled in us. So my mother's name is Lamberta, begins with L. My father's name is Audinas, begins with A. So I didn't realize that I was part of a system because when my sister was born, Lynette, I was 13. I'm number 2 of 6. And my father called all the older kids and said, you got to help give a name for your sister, but on 2 conditions, beginning with L and 7 letters. And we're like, why? Because my father's like, Tenazas is 7. First name should be 7. 7 and 7. It's very symmetrical. And it's also very, it's lucky, right? 7 is lucky. In my culture, it is. So as you can see here, all the girls are beginning with L, 7 letters, Western names. All the boys are beginning with A, 7 letters, Spanish names. My father came up with that. I don't know how my mother dealt with it. But this is the thing you don't plan. 3 boys and 3 girls. Again, it's perfect symmetry, right? You don't plan what the sex of the kid is gonna be. But the top 3 are right-handed. And the bottom 3 are left-handed. So Lynette, my youngest sister, was showing a predisposition to use her left hand. And my father at that point was fed up with another lefty. And of course, in certain cultures, it's bad luck, right? And also in some cultures, it's like the devil's workshop. And so he would grab the pen from my sister. So my sister is in fact ambidextrous. And I think she's lucky that she's able to use whatever she wants, cut scissors here, draw a pen, whatever. Okay, so this is the culture that I grew up in. Here's Manila, the Philippines. It's like any Asian city, intense, congested, people rubbing elbows with each other. It's not like the suburbs. So when I went to Cranbrook, we were given an assignment to do a reading on learning from Las Vegas. And I said, oh, what's unusual about Las Vegas? That's what I left in my country. And so here's the book by Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. In 1968, they brought their students from Yale to Las Vegas and study it as a landscape, as an urban landscape, that it was a manufactured city. And so I was like, I had to kind of understand what was meaningful about this. Why is it suddenly being taught in school? And I was so used to it. So we were asked to read this book and create a project based on a series of observations. And I think this is what Luis was talking about, that my interest in the urban landscape and observing what goes on at street level is really important. And the idea of what vernacular was for us. So it was more like, it was to me a learning experience. So the project rested on assessing a landscape at street level, getting all the typographic messages from the facades, and then making something out of it. And this is a 15-week project. And I told Kathy, I said, what do you want us to do? She said, Lucille, you're in grad school. You have to answer that question. I tell that to my students now. If they're confused, Lucille, what do you want us to do? You're in school. You have to figure it out. So anyway, based on this, this was my initial exploration. I thought, what I'm going to rip every image, and then I'm just going to let the typography stand. So I have all these sort of positive, negative representations of letters, and they are based on the information I saw, based on the categories. Like there was a store that sold beer, magazines, or I thought, okay, that would be fitting under goods. And then there was a store that sold stuff for animals and pets, and then services for parking, dry cleaning, etc. So I think this was my way of making sense out of nonsense. I think this is what designers do. You are confronted with a cacophony of information, and what do you make of it? So I think this is what, to me, my sort of systematic side, thank you, my father, that really, and then I developed this whole series of compositions that were very complicated, very complex. And I think this, to me, was the groundswell of my interest in typography and messages. So as you can see here, this is a whole series and then eventually using the photography, the collage, how there was this sort of like complexity and layering that I realized my hands are really very, it's very easy for me to make things very complex, and to make things minimal is harder for me. But so I had to teach myself to sometimes be like tie my hands behind my back and just say, okay, Lucille, this is too easy for you. Don't resort to the easy ones. And so every once in a while I go back and forth, and I like that because I think it's the challenge that you only can pose yourself, and it doesn't have to come from anybody. So here we are at the Letterform archive, right? So the reason why I'm showing this is I had to go back to my student projects, and I realized, we had no design history in the Philippines. We had art history, right? So I heard about Russian constructivism. Lissitzky was a name that I read about, but I had no idea about the work they did as designers and typographers. And it wasn't until I arrived in the United States that I thought, letter forms, because you can't read Russian or any language except English and the things that you know how to speak. What do they look like to you? They look like form. And for me, like the construction of this logo of Lissitzky was just this sort of architectonic quality that drew me into, this whole idea of how can a system be poetic and expressive and sort of systematic at the same time. So of course, there's this that it's over there, the real one. And we all know this artwork, this poster by Lissitzky. What do you call it? Do you remember? It's called Beat the Whites with the Red. There you go. Rob's showing it, Exhibit A. Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge. And Lissitzky was this avant-garde Russian artist and major figure in the suprematist and constructivist movement. So what is it about this work that made me, I remember there was an exhibit of this in Washington at the Hirshhorn Gallery. I think it was in the early 80s. And I just I had to what's the word? Kind of pinch myself. I said, I'm in front of a Lissitzky original. I can't get over this. So it was very interesting to explore that. Likewise with this is another Lissitzky piece. Okay, now this is my project at CCAC. My first project with Michael Vanderbilt. And he said, you're going to design a poster, and it could be on anything. It can be any topic. And so I saw that book that is now here in the archives. And I just want to show you, I have the real thing here. This is cut pieces of paper. And, of course, there's no laptop at the time, no computer. So what was drawing me to this thing? It's geometry, but at the same time, it's like going amok. It goes crazy. It's just this consistent sort of motion. But the idea of typography at a diagonal, I've never done it before. And it was because of what I saw, that somehow this idea of 45-degree typography is I've never seen this. So the class was asked to design a senior poster so that when we graduated a few months later, the chosen poster would be printed. So I designed, because I was excited, I designed 3 versions of the poster. This is one of them. And so you can see all the students' names floating around. And number 4 meant like we were the 4th annual senior show. Again, this is all rub down type. This is 1979. So where does this come from? I don't, I was just so, I think I remember when people saying, why are you doing 3? We're only asked to do 1. And I said, it's not like I'm trying to like curry favor from the teachers. I just loved working with new ideas that I have never done before. And if I'm confronted with that, I'm just like going crazy. I'm just on my own doing it. So this was one design. So you can see the grid and the diagonal breaking it. This was the one that was chosen. So that red square makes an appearance yet again, but the number 4 is calligraphic. So I actually painted this. I drew this with a brush. And people ask me, I think Louise asked me this, how did you get interested in typography? And I could say that the beginnings of my interest in typography began because I was a very good calligrapher. I was always the class artist, and we had to, every week we had like I went to a Catholic girls' school run by German nuns, okay? So I only went to one school in the Philippines, kindergarten to college. So those nuns who were a little scary when you're 5 years old, they don't get scary when you're 21. And especially because you only have one trajectory of a school. But I would write like, Jesus, Mary, Joseph, pray for us, or something, some religious intention at the top of the board in colored chalk. And I was always the one selected to do it. And I realized I really love calligraphy. I had beautiful handwriting. So how did I said, I have to show it. Helvetica was very severe, but then I wanted to kind of give a certain kind of intuitive quality to it. Anyway, I left CCA. I gave my comps to my teachers for them to make a decision. They made a decision in March. Graduation was supposed to happen in May. I was gone. I was already at Cranbrook. And so I get a call from Michael Mannering. By the way, Lucille, your poster was chosen to be the senior poster. And I said, but I'm not there anymore. I'm not even graduating with the class. They said, we'll put your name in it. So my name is there. And I have to thank Michael Vanderbilt and Michael Mannering for believing that because this poster was what I had done, even if I wasn't there anymore, it was still important for them to credit me. So I appreciate that. Okay, Rodchenko. So we have another one there. So Rodchenko was again one of those, because of Lissitzky, I was exposed to the other Russian constructivists and supremacists. We had a history, and this is typical in design school, history poster. So I thought, who would I choose? I chose Rodchenko. This is a giant poster that is about 3 feet long. And this was done on diazo. This is all like rub down, silk screen. Everything here, I had to cut this one line by line so that they were all lined up. But the casting of the eye and the ray was really amazing. And I wanted to make sure that the Rodchenko was not in English, but it was in the Russian characters, and the English is over there. So that brings up my interest in bilinguality. I'm interested in hierarchies of information. What predominates? Is it 50-50 when you're introducing a second language? And because I am bilingual and even trilingual, it's one of those things where I try to balance my knowledge so I don't privilege one over the other. Now, I don't know if you remember this. Does anybody know Space Mats from April Greiman and Jamie Odgers? Okay, so Kathy McCoy brought this to school one day at Cranbrook, and she said, this designer from Los Angeles, she was trained in the Swiss mode, but she became a renegade when she moved to LA. And so she's selling these space mats, and they're like, placemats, but with these collages. I have one of these. And I just thought, what is this? This is amazing. So I got this. I got this online, actually, this picture, because mine is in New York. And then this whole series of If you go online and just look space mats, you'll find these. But they were such an inspiration to me because I thought, this is, how does this fit into my influential sphere? So one of my projects at CCA, there's my, there was a cafe that Michael Vanderbilt and all the Michaels would actually go to, which was on Third. It was on Third between Bryant and Harrison, called Cafe Lido. Does anybody know this? Is anybody here long enough to know this? Okay, so I remember Michael was saying that was like the hangout of the designers. And so he said, if you want to find somebody like and show your portfolio, just go to Cafe Lido because they're all there. So I did this, and I just want to show you. This is all hand painted. And when people ask me what, even my students, you mean you didn't have a computer and you just drew this by hand? I said, yeah, because that's all we could do. We did not have computers. This is not output, but this is all collage and Xeroxes. And then I did it again at Cranbrook. And at this point, my pastel colors of California will be predominating. And so Kathy McCoy said, okay, your assignment is to do a vegetable poster. And, we don't have asparagus in the Philippines. Okay. So I just thought, I just love this vegetable. There's something really, amazing about this. You can cook it this way and whatever. So I thought, why not? So all of these things, these are all hand drawn. And I drew ink over them. And this is, again, the repetition of the diagonal. Why is it recurring? So Piet Zwart, now again in that collection. When I was studying art history, I thought the only Dutch designer or artist, not even design, it wasn't even in my consciousness. The only Dutch artist I knew was Mondrian, Piet Mondrian. But then I saw this, and Kathy was introducing some of these. You, of course, know that this has been reproduced here by Letterform Archive. This catalog by this company that Piet Zwart had done. And this is my poster that I did for the AIGA San Francisco chapter. So I wanted to combine both the modernist Dutch, and then I have a corner painting here by Rembrandt. So I was like doing all these kind of like, I guess you could say mixing, if you will. And the diagonal is a very strong component because the stamp in the middle had a diagonal. So what I like about this is that little thing, and how big is a stamp? It's like an inch, right? It dictated the whole composition of the whole piece. And that from this little micro thing, it becomes macro. So I think that so many of these influences affected my work, but I think part of it also was that I had a kind of natural affinity for complexity to begin with. So this is a poster I did for CCA for the graduate show in 2002. And talk about complex, there are 4 programs: design, fine arts, visual criticism, writing. And of course, the address of CCA is 1111. So I thought one number for each program. And the poster contained a calendar. It had events. It had student work, etc. Is that me? Okay. So because of my interest in language, I started to really look at not just the form. Okay. Form is easy for me because I feel like I have a natural affinity for composition. But semantics is about meaning. And when I look at what a word means and what it looks like in my mind's eye, I have to like listen to it. I tell my students, part of you, when you're designing that has typography, you should say it aloud. Like hot house. Could you say hot house? You don't. You say hot house. And that's it. It's screaming for something, right? So what does it mean? Well, it's got to be big. What else? It's got to be bright. Because it means what it looks like. It should look like what it means. I guess that's what it is. So that's when I call you operate in the semantic dimension. And so this was the cover of a catalog I did for Cranbrook, the fiber program with Nick Cave, who was one of our graduates on the cover. And then this one, I love this exhibit. This is a museum in Long Island, the Heckscher Museum of Art. They asked me to design the logo also, which is the square. Now, why is that square making an appearance again? But it was about mathematics and contemporary art. And I thought this is the perfect combination of, STEM and STEAM, really, STEAM. The A is part of that. It's not just one way. It's not just science and math and technology, but it also has to include art. And this is a photograph by Hiroshi Sugimoto. And if you've seen, are you familiar with his work? Some of you know. This was just one of those, but it was this perfect cone, and I had to use it. And then this one is one of my projects for Parsons. I was asked to design a recruitment brochure for the Product Lighting Architecture Interior Design School. And I said, okay, I can't privilege one of the four. So what do I show? Show student work, faculty work, a little bit of everything, a little bit of product, a little bit of architecture, a little bit of lighting. And so you have a little bit of everything. And I call this the pragmatic side. I don't call it front and back because they're equally important to me. So the pragmatic side has all the information you need. And then the outline of the image is on the poetic side. So it's really the combination of poetic and pragmatic. And even the construction or the choice of the way the typography is laid out talks about, my understanding of how these words can be read, even if it's not complete. So many years ago, this magazine still exists, right? Okay, I was approached by the publishers. This is 2000. They said, we have a new magazine we want to produce for San Francisco, and it's based on the geographic dimensions of the peninsula or of San Francisco, 7 by 7, 7 square miles by 7. And I thought, that's great. I've never heard of a magazine that is identified by a number, right? You typically call like Frisco. You don't want to call that Frisco. There was San Francisco. So these were the logos I played with. Some of these I think are still being used. But my proposal to the publishers at the time was, you know what? Every issue should be different. Every issue should have a different 7 by 7. Make it one line, horizontal, do diagonal in a different configuration. And then I said, I have an idea. I'm not an editor, but what if there are only 7 stories? 7 key stories. And I said, I know this is a maiden issue, issue number 1. But what if you begin your first issue with a black and white image, not color, not like everybody else, but do it black and white? And they're like, it's not going to sell, Lucille, because people like personalities. I said, well, let me show you some. How about another design? What about this? Don't show the face. And make the 7 really blow up, explode it. And then it's like a person saying, come on, follow me. Follow me to 7 by 7. Okay, so what's the upshot of this client? They let me go. They said, Lucille, you're just too sophisticated. Yeah, first of all, we can't do a black and white cover. Plus, you don't see faces. You have a man's back. How's that going to sell? Okay, it's still around though. But I show this anyway because I really love what I did here. I wanted to make a point. Okay, so this one was for a library in Milpitas. I did this before I left back in 2005. So for a library in Milpitas, this architect told me, Lucille, there's a giant wall. It's like, I don't know how high, 3 stories high or something. And, when you enter the library, people are just looking at magazines and looking at the computers and trying to get to the card catalog. But, what if we had something that they could read while they're waiting? They're just sitting there. I said, yeah, okay, well, let's have, what's the demographics? Well, there's some people from, China, Japan, Spanish, of course, like Latino. I said, okay, what if I get a poem by, what's his name? Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet. And I just thought, the ode, I don't know if you've ever come across his work. You should read his book called Ode to Common Things. So there's ode to the scissors, ode to the bed, ode to the bar of soap. And that's what I really love about mundane objects that get elevated. into something that you would never assume. Like, what's important about soap? You just wash your hands with it. But if you read Pablo Neruda, so this one was Ode to the Onion. And I thought, okay, I definitely will have that. So this one is in detail. You're looking at it. It's almost like it's an educational project. The Spanish and the English are butting against each other. So you see one in one language and another one in another language. And then I love this brief, short poem, but William Carlos Williams on the left, the red wheelbarrow. I just love that. Can you see? So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Done. So this is one of those things when I design and I tell my students also about typography, I show them this. I said, this is how you would love typography if you say it aloud, because you'll hear yourself reading it. And then there's a haiku, of course, that's also in Japanese and English. There's the detail. Okay, I'll just show a series of these projects. This is for SF MoMA, a catalog cover for revelatory landscapes. And then when Karen was a guest Karen from Imaginary Forces, she was a guest speaker at Parsons. I designed her announcement poster. And because I was really interested in the filmic kind of work that Karen does. So I had these slivers of images. And then I also, I want to show a series of these projects. I belong to this international design organization called AIGA, Alliance Graphique Internationale. And every year we have a congress in a different country. So typically they ask the designers to submit a project that they either put into a book or it's a poster that's going to be publicly shown. So this was in Barcelona. And you can see here how and Barcelona, as if you've been, of course, is known for its tiles. And so I wanted to replicate this sort of modularity because of the grid and also because of the tile. So there's Barcelona. I mean, you don't see it very well. Then we were in Bielbeen, which is in Switzerland. And they always give us a theme. This was on coexistence. There's always the X marks the spot. And then this was in Seoul, in Korea. And the theme was, I love Seoul. I said, the word is so sappy. What can I do with it? And so either it's big or it's like blended with everything else, but it's much more about the complexity of the word love and soul together. And that's what love and soul is showing up here. And then lastly, this is in Mexico City. Again, bilingual, el otro lado, which means the other side. And this is a project that my husband, Richard Barnes, who's a photographer, did of, this was at the University of Michigan, where they have a collection of all these backpacks. And these backpacks are the ones carried over the border that has a clean change of clothes, a bottle of water. And as soon as they cross the border, they leave all of these backpacks behind them. So there's a whole series of these backpacks that have been collected as artifacts of these people who crossed the border. Okay, so let's go to another period here. Now we are now in the Bodoni period. Do you have anything by Bodoni in your collection? We have this book, okay. So back in 2019, I think it was the 200th anniversary of the publication of Manuale Tipografico. And so they had an exhibit at the Museo Bodoniano in where is it? Bologna. No, not Bologna. Parma. Yeah, in Parma. And so they asked designers all over the world to submit a poster that they would hang at the Museo Bodoniano. And so I didn't know this, that Bodoni was actually interested in different languages. In this book, as you can see, he has all of this in these different languages. He had these characters. I was just amazed. And so that was the impetus by the curator to invite people from all over the world to submit their pieces to this exhibit. And so mine was bilingual again. So this is a question I ask my students and I ask myself. Sino ka in Tagalog is who are you? And ano ka is what are you? And when I tell my students on day one, I said, this is our icebreaker. When I call your name, you have to answer these two questions and say, I said, who are you and what are you? And they look at me and say, the same thing, right? No. So tell me, who are you? Oh, my name is Lucille Tenazas and I teach at Parsons. And what are you? And I have to pause because I have to let it soak in and think about, what am I going to say? So this one was my response, that it was more of a confrontational question said in four languages: English first, Italian, because we had lived in Rome, Spanish, and then Tagalog. And the quote is, I am a good traveler but a bad tourist. So in Tagalog, ako ay mahusay na manlalakbay pero masama akong turista. So I looked at that and I thought, I'm like the bookends here. Are you a tourist or are you a traveler? We are both. Sometimes we are both, but sometimes we would prefer to be one or the other. And biography in Tagalog is talambuhay, and buhay is life. So a few years ago, I discovered Tipoteca Italiana Fondazione, which is in Cornuda, north of Venice. And it is the one letterpress printer that I urge you to go to, because you will be playing. When you get there, you are like in a candy store. So Daniele is my master printer. I decided to go there and do a project for myself. And this is Leonardo, his son. I was just in Tipoteca 2 weeks ago, and Daniele retired the next day after being there for almost 40 years, because they told me, the manager said, Lucille, if you want Daniele to do your work, you got to come. I said, I'll come on the last day, on the day after. So I came up with these projects, these words. These are letterpress, which I will have later. I'll show you. They're words that define my work. And I am working on my monograph that I would like to interject some of these letterpress pages instead of chapter openings. Form, frame. Now, I made sketches before I left for Italy. But then, of course, when you are there and opening drawers of wood type, you just have to throw all your sketches out the window, because suddenly I get this wonderful fonts, like this big. This F was this high. I said, I'm just going to get a couple of these Fs and let me do something with it. Same with the V, that my work is really about what is verbal and what is visual. And then working with metaphor and symbol, transparency. And this is the cover. This is, I'm thinking of looking at my name in a way that is not easily recognized. So it's silver against gray. That's on the cover. And then on the back, after the fact, after you've read through the book, then you can see who I am or what I am. So I went back just last month and I thought, I want to do other things. I want to see what I can do there with the same intensity that I had. So that first project, this series, I was there for a week. This time around, they said, Lucille, we're busy. We have students coming. They're doing workshops. We can only give you 3 days. Okay, 3 days, what can I do? So of course I start opening drawers. I didn't even have a sketch. I just said, Lucille, just design on the spot. Just be extemporaneous. Just be flexible. So this is what Tipoteca and letterpress has taught me, that because my brain and my hand are together, or they extend to each other, back and forth, that I can in fact do it without even a preparatory sketch, that I have to trust my judgment. And look at this, the one in the middle, I just saw this big L and the T, and then I saw the small L and T, and I thought, I can play with this. What can I do with them? Put them together. So I just want to end with this, back to my name, right? So my name, as I said, is Tenazas, which means pincers or tongs, right? So this was my next design. I'm always designing for my family reunion. My family is over here, by the way. They're all lined up on this side. It's my nieces and her sons. The one representative from the Tenazas family raised the flag. But this is, they always say, hey, what are you doing this time? I said, well, I don't know, maybe another T-shirt. So the Tenazas was in the front. This one was in the back. So people would know, what does that mean? You're clutching that Z. But anyway, I was so happy when I saw that the meaning of tenacity, which is right? And Luis, we never talked about this. That tenacity is about this quality And I don't think people would look at me and they say, you know, Lucille, she's tenacious. Now, I don't think they would see that in me necessarily, only after they've known me for a while. Perseverance is what I would say, not doggedness, but perseverance and patience. But then a few years ago, I was in Paris and I saw this wine, which is actually Australian. And I thought, oh my God, I should buy like a whole case of this. Anyway, thank you. Cheers.